The following program is rated PG-13. Parental supervision is advised.
All right. Let me get my clothes on here and put my pants on. All right. Nobody's naked, right? All right.
Poseidon, the ruler of the seas and all that dwell within them. His rule over the oceans is unquestioned. There are those who serve him with tridents and with infinite knowledge of all things submarine. They are known by many names: coners, weaponeers, the merry men of Sherwood Forest. But by Poseidon himself, they are called the subvets.
And you have to understand, if a submarine is out of communication for even a moment, that has to be reported to the captain, to the officer of the deck. If you are out of contact for any extended period, that has to be reported to the captain. Extended period being about 10 minutes. At DEFCON 3, which is the high state of readiness we were at, it had to be reported immediately to the captain. 20 minutes had went by, and we had been unable to reestablish communication. There was a lot of anxiety. This was unusual. It had not happened, in my experience.
Everybody's imagining the worst.
Absolutely. Compounding this was the fact that we had a hostile Russian contact, a surface ship in the vicinity, very near us, and we were aware of that. So going to the surface or near the surface to deploy another type of antenna to listen to shortwave, which is, there are a lot of redundant systems to communicate with submarines. Shortwave, satellites, just like you mentioned, long wave.
Got an EAM and a teletype. It's verified. Very well. Con radio, receiving emergency action message. Receiving emergency action message.
Chief of the Watch on the 1MC, alert one. Alert one. You know what that means.
Alert
right?
one. Alert one. Hey there, submarine fans. This is Eric from the subvet.com. That's how I used to introduce my old submarine videos. So, yeah, we're just trying to get into the atmosphere of what we're getting ready to talk about today. Some exciting stuff, Dave.
And this is Dave, who
and
always
I'm
hated
Eric.
Who always hated alert one, because you know what that means, right? I'm the targeting guy. It means I'm getting out of bed. Unless by some chance it's just a communications exercise. But, there
would be sometimes, you remember it had to been the same on the Tridents. There would be sometimes they were just getting information. It would be alert one.
Yeah,
and it wake you up and you're like, oh gosh, here it's coming. Everybody gotta go to battle stations, WSRT. And then you just wait a little bit, and then it didn't get called out, and you're like, oh, I can go back to sleep. Do you remember those times?
Yeah, the ones I hated were the retarget and strikes, because those are the ones I knew I was getting up for. And if you're just going to go straight to battle stations for WSRT, that's great. I'm all for that, but I don't mind that. But the retarget and strike exercises, oh my God! Now I got to drive.
Yeah. Well, I never got.
By my third, fourth patrol, I was the targeting guy, so I didn't. It wasn't even like I could just, go and watch. I had to go and do. And
so obviously I never got into any of the targeting. So after all that melee with the Walker incident, missile techs, top secrets were downgraded to secrets. And I don't even think we had access to the targeting unless you were trained down there in FTB land, because the rates were separate back then. So unless you were an FTB, you just weren't involved with that targeting. So a lot of those times, that could be what I was talking about. I got to sleep in. Meanwhile, you FTB girls were down there targeting, which you deserve, because when we were getting ready to go on patrol, we're working our butts off on PMs. You guys are drinking beer at the
right.
Yeah,
we never did any PMs or anything. We never greased muzzle hats.
No, it didn't. FTB.
Right.
FTB, first to the beach.
Right. Yeah, it's absolutely true. And if you believe that, well, there you go. I mean,
Hey, I'm digging that. Is that a PRP shirt you got?
It is.
Man, I love that.
Yeah. I figured I'd wear it today because of the topic subject matter at hand is all about I don't even know how to describe this. Do you want to describe this?
Well, okay. You being a professional radio guy, I mean, and I don't even know how to, I mean, obviously your area of topics normally is history, which you do a great job. I highly recommend and listen to Dave's podcast, especially on the historical and on the Constitution too. Great stuff. And you probably talked about politics and other things when you had your radio show. Was it what venue was it? Was it San Diego or
Modesto, California, Central California? Modesto and Stockton, California. We were actually based in Modesto, but we did Stockton as well. So we basically covered South Sacramento to Fresno.
So I grew up as an AM talk radio guy. I mean, I listened to all those guys, Rush Limbaugh, the morning host, which, could be a cadre depending on what mark you were. I mean, my dad got me started on that early. So not everybody is exposed to it. Some people hate it because, some people, you either hate or love Rush Limbaugh or you love the other different ones. And there was a great mix of both Democrat and Republican type AM talkers back in the day in the 90s. And then they, depending on what you follow, some dominated more than others. But at the nighttime, when it got into the nighttime, truck drivers, especially because, you're trucking down the road and it's just, you got nothing else to do. So you either listen to the same old Alabama songs over and over and your country music. Not saying all truck drivers are a bunch of country music lovers, but, I could talk to my brother about that. But anyways, no, they would listen to Art Bell, conspiracies. So Art Bell he started off as a political commentary. I think he did a daytime show and then he went into nights and then he just kind of slowly in the 80s, he started getting into talking about conspiracy type topics. And it wasn't just UFOs and aliens. I mean, it was anything. And sometimes he would cover some hot topics of the day and get into, like during the O.J. Simpson trials. I mean, he got involved. He got some guests and talked about that, in the mid 90s and stuff. The Oklahoma City bombing, all the big conspiracy. What was it? 93, the World Trade Center, the first time it got bombed, if you remember that. But, Art Bell, hate him or love him. And, Dave's going to say, it's just not me. He absolutely dominated the nighttime market. And for me, what I find interesting, whether you get into conspiracies or not, it seems like a lot of the stuff he was talking about the mid to the late 90s, and he turned the show over to George Norrie in early 2000s, the Coast to Coast AM. I mean, he just, a lot of the stuff he talked about is really starting to come true. It's what if you're following UFO scenes, it seems like the things that they were saying, there's no way that any of this could be possible. But now, the CIA, for whatever, with ATIP and, the F-18s, they're following the Tic Tacs and all that stuff. All of a sudden now it happened when everybody denied it before. So it's just interesting. A lot of the stuff that I used to follow back then, seems to be coming true now. But so I have trouble sleeping with all the medical ailments, which, you've seen we post from time to time. Well, it seems like it's half my channel on Facebook. Eric's dying. We all are going to die eventually. But anyways, since I can't sleep sometimes, I'll listen to the old Art Bell show. So I was just perusing through the shows, and all of a sudden I ran into one with a guy that called into the Art Bell show in 1997, October 22nd, named as Officer X. And he claimed he was on board the Ulysses S. Grant, my submarine, my quad boat, and was talking about a Crimson Tide type situation. Crimson Tide meaning the movie, if you didn't see it. I mean, some of the younger crowd, maybe. I mean, it's hard to believe you don't know what I'm talking about, but I mean, we've talked about that movie and we say it's a little crazy, but the drama is it's a cool movie to watch from the drama and the suspense type thing. But is what it is. But no, it gets into the whole real thing. Apparently, they broke communication, and there was a malfunction with I think it's the ELF trailing wire they were talking about. There's like a end-to-end loop test you can perform to make sure it's working. And apparently when they got back to port, they found out it was shorted, and that's why they were losing communications. But they couldn't establish communications for several hours, which turned into 6 hours. And apparently the department heads were trying to talk to captain and saying, hey, we've lost communications. The Russians have had it. Obviously the world's ended. We need to launch, which that sounds ridiculous right off the bat.
Why it sounds ridiculous?
What's that?
Because it is ridiculous.
Absolutely. It is ridiculous. But but the thing is, the guy's calling in. The thing is, he identifies the boat he was on, says that he was the communications officer on the Grant and on the Los Angeles class. So he gives enough information where the guy can obviously be identified. And we're gonna play a little bit of this, but as we get into it, we'll discuss why that this is definitely, there's just no way this could happen. But it also brings up some thoughts, and we're gonna have some thoughts on nuclear weapons release. With the potential hot war that we got going on today, and the fact that was there 6-7 navies out there that got ballistic missile capabilities out there. So nobody knows how they're completely set up. And like Dave and I said before, we've been out a long time. We don't even know how, we have an idea, but we don't know the exact nuclear weapons release procedures, as well as we did, obviously, when we were in the Navy. So go ahead.
Just by way of starting this, yes, I did work in conservative talk radio for a decade. Actually worked in it longer, but I was a show host for about a decade. My passion was for production. I much prefer to do production, although I did enjoy hosting my show for those years, and I have continued it as a podcast for now officially longer than I was actually on the air, which is kind of weird to me. But the show, conservative talk radio and talk radio in general, it's theater of the mind, folks, and you need to understand this. It is pure theater. Even Rush Limbaugh would tell you to your face, if you asked him, I'm just an entertainer. It's all I am. There are people who make hay. I wouldn't point any fingers or name any names, but it rhymes with Glenn Beck, who try to position themselves as some sort of educator, mystical, Gnostic, enlightened, and whatever. But at the end of the day, everything you hear on your radio, everything you hear on radio or a paid podcast is about one thing and one thing only: ratings. Ratings equal money. If you don't have ratings, you're not going to last long. Now, I'm happy to say that my show, when I did it on air, we were beating everything but the country music radio station, which in Modesto, California, you can pretty much see why. We had a good show. We had a good time after.
I didn't realize they had country music radio stations in California.
Oh yeah. So everything is about ratings. Everything is about sales. Everything is about getting you to listen to radio in what are known as increments. Now, they don't do it this way anymore, but at the time that Art Bell did this show, the way radio ratings were settled was the company would send out, the ratings company would send out books, and they're just little folding books. And you would, if you got one of these books, and you would get paid for this, not a lot, but you would get paid for it, you would write down everything you listened to on the radio and for how long. And the radio hour is divided into 15-minute segments. So it's 12 to 15 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes, 30 minutes to 45, 45 to 50, or 45 to the top of the hour. And if you listen to radio today, you'll notice that it pretty much sticks to that, except that radio people have figured it out. And this is why Rush Limbaugh did his. You ever notice that Rush Limbaugh's first segment of his show, which started promptly at 6 after, you had news at the top of the hour, you had 1 minute break, 6 o'clock, downbeat for Rush. And he always went to 23, 24 after the hour in his first segment. Why? Because that way if you listen to the first segment of Rush and that's all you listen to, he got a half hour of TSL, time spent listening, because you listened to 2 segments, quarter after and half past. So everything you hear in radio is designed to get you to listen longer, because then you'll listen to the ads and you'll listen to, now there's some, I had a general manager once who told me that's, you pull on people's heartstrings, you entertain them. They'll listen through static. They'll listen through breaks because they want to hear what you're saying. This is why Rush Limbaugh was notorious for never getting to the blankety blank point. He could drag a story out for 52 minutes before he ever got to his point, if he ever got to his point. Now, people like me were throwing things at the radio because he was driving me up a wall. Get to the blankety blank point, I would scream. But most people don't even catch that. George Norrie of Coast to Coast AM, Art Bell of Coast to Coast AM, was once interviewed and referred to his show as, quote, absolute entertainment, unquote. So when you listen to Art Bell's show and when you listen to what we're going to play you this Officer X, keep in mind that Art Bell's goal is to keep you listening for more than 15 minutes at a time so that he gets credit for you listening to multiple segments. His TSL rating goes up, and he has learned what I call the holy grail of radio. There is a way to make money in radio. Most people will never achieve it. Most people will never even come close to it because it requires you to sell your soul. And most people can't do that or won't do that. And the answer to how to make money in radio is to be, and I'm sorry, I know this is a family show, but you'll forgive it this one time, to be batshit crazy. That is how you make money in radio. That is why people like the nut Alex Jones. It's why Art Bell. It's why the more crazy you are, the more successful your show is going to be and the more money you're going to make. Glenn Beck. These are the people who make money because they are literally BSC. They don't believe anything they're telling you. In fact, Alex Jones, during his trial, for his custody trial for his children, was forced to admit on the stand that his entire show is shtick. It's an act. And I don't know if I believe him or not, because I know people who know him, and they were a little surprised by that. But these other people, Rush Limbaugh's, Sean Hannity's, Glenn Beck's, Art Bell, God rest his soul, will tell you that their show is absolute entertainment. Now, they'll tell you that because if it's absolute entertainment, it doesn't matter what they say. They can't really be held, the feet can't be held to the fire for their opinion if it's just entertainment. See? So I can't be responsible for the fact that I told people to go kill themselves so that they could get on the UFO following the Hale-Bopp comet. But he interviews this guy, Officer X, he's going to call him. And Eric sent me this, I don't know, late last week, I guess, earlier this week. I don't remember when it was. I guess it would have been Tuesday of this week, wouldn't it? Because I was at the baseball game. Sorry.
Yeah. I didn't want to post it because I wanted to make sure we talked about it before I posted.
My son and grandson and I played hooky on Tuesday and went to the baseball game. So at any rate, I will tell you that I approach anything on Art Bell's show with not just skepticism, but bemused skepticism, because I know what he's trying to do. That said, I was literally, I'd give it less than 60 seconds into this guy's spiel, Officer X speaking, and my BS alarm was going through the roof.
Oh, yeah, right? Yeah.
Because he's going to say things that submariners of that era particularly will go, wait, if I stood here and told you that in 1984, I was the battle station's missile supervisor aboard the USS Utah, a Los Angeles class ballistic missile submarine, what would you say to me?
I would say, really? The Utah.
and yet these people are going to say things that are, if someone said that to me, I would call BS. But None of that happens here. Now, he doesn't say that specifically, but if you listen to it, you'll hear what I'm talking about. The story is fantastical. It is far-fetched and far-strung. Again,
I want to save some of it before, because what I would like to do is play some of it. Right. And maybe you can hold your hand up and say stop if you want to make a comment, and I'll stop it. And we'll make some comments, and then I'll stop it if I feel like you make some comments too. But no, I mean, there's a lot of great points. I mean, the TSO, I didn't know about that, but I find it interesting what you said about Glenn Beck. But you know, they all are entertainers. So even with the recent UFO conspiracy stuff that are being brought up, a lot of shows are carrying that stuff for the same fact. Let
me give you one more example. Pick up any book that Glenn Beck has written. Mm-hmm. Pick up any book. Go to Barnes & Noble, go to your used books. Any book that has Glenn Beck's name on it. Open it to the title page and see who really wrote it.
He has ghostwriters.
They're not even ghostwriters. They're people like Josh Charles, who wrote a great book that Glenn Beck put his name on because Glenn Beck convinced him, and he says this in the intro, convinced them that with my name on it, it won't sell, but with his name on it, it will.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. You know, in his early shows, because I ran Glenn Beck when he was out of Tampa, and he wasn't even really on national markets yet. I think he was starting to get out on AM, but his was a comedian type shtick, if you will, talking about, you know, the news, but they were making fun of it. Him and his co-host Stu, and I can't remember the other guy.
All right,
his name.
But anyway, I'll shut up and we'll get to Officer X. Here you go.
Yeah, let's get to playing some Officer X, and of course, we're not breaking any rules here either by playing this show because I found it's archived with the Library of Congress stuff. So and when I post it in the links after when you listen to this podcast, that's where you will be directed to listen to it. So let's listen to some Officer X. So he's already done an intro, trying to state some of his credentials, you know, how he got into the service and stuff like that. And, you know, kind of setting up, like you said, dragging on. Go ahead.
So speaking of the intro, since we're going to skip this, keep in mind that this guy claims to be a submariner from the 1980s.
Communicator.
Okay? Communications officer who went to boot camp.
Yes. I missed that part.
Art Bell says to him, this is a quote. Art Bell says to him, "My brother-in-law is a submariner. He's on the USS Simon Lake, which is a nuclear submarine." And X says nothing.
Right. And we all know Simon Lake is, well, you can figure that out.
A nuclear submarine.
Like the Utah. Okay, so here we go. Let's hear some Officer X on the Art Bell Show.
And here I am again. Officer X is my guest. Communications officer on the Ulysses S. Grant at one point, and then the Dallas, Los Angeles class submarine. A man who held top secret SCI crypto clearances, but he's got something he wants to tell us, and we're about to get to that. Back now to Officer X, and let's pick up where we left off. You said Tomahawk nuclear-tipped missiles, or that they could be, and they asked you if you were in concert with the mission, which could be retaliation. In other words, the U.S. Or one of our allies would be hit, and then your job would be to launch your nuclear weapons in retaliation. Killing millions, no doubt, of people, but it would be in retaliation because the attack would have already occurred. And you were presented with that question. How'd you answer it?
Well, to be honest with you, at the time, I think I replied a curt, yes, sir, of course I believe in the mission of the nuclear navy. When in reality, I didn't. And, you know, I had some time to examine that belief. Based on the incident. The incident actually occurred while I was on board the Ulysses S. Grant.
Okay.
So, did they? I don't know. Maybe this is one of those things I should have looked up back. Were officer. See, I'm not convinced this guy's an officer. I'm not convinced of that. He says some things in the intro because of his ham radio background. They made him a radio officer.
Right.
I'm pretty sure it doesn't work that way.
Oh, and he got his license when he was 7 years old, too.
So I don't remember. I mean, we had a nuclear engineer as a strategic fire control officer. So I'm pretty sure the Navy doesn't go, hey, what special skills do you have? And how can we use you on a submarine?
Right.
I'm reasonably sure
it's usually not. It's like, oh, you got a ham radio license?
Ham radio? Yeah.
You're going to communications and we're making you officer.
Right. If he wasn't even an officer. But were officers not subject to the PRP?
If you're a communicator, absolutely, you had to be on PRP.
So that said, in all of my years in the PRP, of which I'm pretty proud. I mean, I bought the T-shirt, right? So
yeah, got the T-shirt.
Right, been there, done that. Got the T-shirt. I don't ever remember anybody asking me whether or not I was quote unquote on board with the nuclear mission of the United States Navy, unquote. I don't ever remember anybody saying to me, so if we were going to go retaliate, would you be okay? Do you personally approve of that, Dave? Nobody ever asked me that. What they asked me were things like, how you feeling? Is your mind okay? I actually got a DIS interview or a PRP interview at one point because I went, this is a true story. Right? Remember that the PRP looks at your normal behavior and then says when you deviate from that behavior, they want to know why. What's going on that you changed your behavior? I got an interview once because I went 90 days without a speeding ticket. And they wanted to know why. What's
Oh,
changed,
yeah,
Dave?
you've talked about this once.
What's changed? What's different?
I've never heard of that.
Yeah. But I never got asked in all my years. I never got asked. So what's your opinion of the nuclear posture of the United States, and would you participate in a retaliatory strike? He starts talking about that crap, and I'm like, dude, nobody asked you that. That didn't happen.
Well, the other thing too I picked up on too is I'm pretty sure I knew the weapons officers were usually LDO back then, but I think all officers are nuclear trained now too, and I'm pretty sure the communications officer was nuclear trained. He doesn't bring anything about going to nuke school or anything. But let's get back into it. Let's listen to it a little bit more.
And I think probably I should just tell that story.
Please.
You have to understand a lot of conditions conspired to make this possible. Many of them unusual, and so perhaps people should not go to sleep at night worrying about it. Probably does not happen very often. At the time, we were involved in some fairly intense negotiations and diplomatic wrangling with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya.
I recall.
This culminated in the Air Force airstrike against Mr. Gaddafi.
That's right.
That was ordered by President Reagan.
Mm-hmm.
During this time, of course, there was a stringent Russian objection to that policy and in fact to that whole line of discourse. And that tension between the United States and Russia had built and built to the point that we were at a very high state of readiness. I believe we were at DEFCON 3 at the time, which was, a very high state of readiness. And through a series of accidents.
Stop! Push on the brakes. DEFCON 3.
Dude, I am so calling BS on this.
Yeah.
Do you know why I'm calling BS on this? Do you know what the date was of those strikes on Libya?
It was 86.
March 24th, 1986. Yeah. I remember March 24th, 1986 super duper well because we actually were on the surface that day. Mm-hmm. I was on the boat. We're on the surface and listening to the radio. And there was music that I had never heard before that I thought was Michael Jackson. Turned out to be Weird Al Yankovic. And there was news reports about bombing Libya. And a heated discussion ensued upon the mess decks about whether or not this was smart or not. Amongst people that have no involvement whatsoever in the political decisions of the United States of America. A bunch of E5s and E4s arguing on the mess decks about whether or not we should bomb Libya.
Right.
I was there. And I'm telling you, DEFCON 3 my ass.
And did you guys run up and tell the captain you needed to be able to launch nuclear weapons?
Right. That's the first thing we did. We said, we better
right
go look at the weapons
bat,
officer and tell him that, we got to be ready to launch any second now.
Unlock that trigger. We got to go. All right. Let's listen to what.
Adventures and just plain bad luck. We, for a period of about 6 hours, lost all communications with the outside world. We lost, we originally ran over our trailing wire antenna, which is very easy to do. You can make a sudden turn, as we did, trying to avoid a surface contact, trying to avoid being detected. Mm-hmm. We turned suddenly, and the antenna, which is hundreds of feet long, does not turn nearly as swiftly, and you can very easily run over it with your propeller and cut it. And that's exactly what happened. So momentarily, we lost communication. That was not unusual. It happens a lot. We attempted to launch a secondary antenna, which is actually a buoy type thing, which floats just below the surface. Mm-hmm. And in attempting to raise the buoy malfunctioned. Again, not uncommon. But for both of them to happen that quickly was kind of strange. So we didn't have communications, but we really didn't have any reason to worry about it. That was, we could explain both of those.
I just want to stop for when I listen to this part. The first thing is Crimson Tide came to mind. So 97, the Crimson Tide came out around the same time, right? 96 or was it 94, 95? Have to look that up. It almost seems like this guy's calling him with a play-by-play, with following the movie Crimson Tide. So the first thing, Danzo watching it going, very well, chief of the watch, fuck the buoy. And then remember the famous scene in the movie, it goes up and then it gets the winch malfunctions, goes, hey, sound short. And I thought they got, so here's the same thing. They think they got detected in the movie. Meanwhile, he claims that there was a Russian warship up in the area.
Of course, because that's way more interesting.
Yeah. There's always a Russian warship on top of a boomer, in regular. Well, that's the way it was. You remember that, right, Dave?
Right. I mean, there was at least my famous saying goes, there were 6 warships following us around on patrol, for 3 days in state 7 seas, right?
In state 7 seas, right?
All right. So here's the part I don't get. We were out of communications. See, again, I'm throwing the BS flag on that because there was a patrol where we, as he said, cut the wire because chief of the boat was on the dive and he wasn't paying attention. And so he managed to cut the wire. They refloated the other wire. They rethreaded the whole thing, floated the other wire. He cut that one. So he cut 2 wires. The buoys were broken because we were in very rough weather and they weren't sitting right or something. I don't remember what it was. And we lost 1 buoy. The other one was broken. And we actually did about 6 hours of alert coverage on the little antenna on number 2 scope. Run that up. Tried to stay at periscope depth in like state 3, state 4 seas. It was pretty fun. But we only had to do a few hours of it. I mean, it wasn't like we did it for weeks. So did you on the U.S. grant not have additional antennas that, tried?
Absolutely. And he claims, and when you guys get a chance to listen to this whole show, which we'll post, he claims that they would never surface an antenna because possibility of getting, the satellites of the day in the 80s, which were certainly more capable than people think. But like they pick you up just like that because you stuck a little antenna out of the water. But no, that would, it's kind of like Tom Clancy type stuff. But no. So let's get back into it. We'll listen to some more here. Officer X.
Incident. We replaced the wire antenna, which can be done inside the submarine. And we deployed a new trailing wire that slowed down so that it could float to the surface. When this happened, we could not reacquire our signal locks. We couldn't, hear anybody, essentially. That was very unusual. Now, we did some tests to ensure that the equipment was working properly, that the antenna was working properly, etc. And everything checked normal, but we had no reception. We couldn't hear anybody. And that was very unusual. And you have to understand, if a submarine is out of communication for even a moment, that has to be reported to the captain, to the officer of the deck. If you are out of contact for any extended period, that has to be reported to the captain. Extended period being about 10 minutes. At DEFCON 3, which is the high state of readiness we were at, it had to be reported immediately to the captain. So this became kind of a big deal. When 20 minutes had went by and we had been unable to reestablish communication, there was a lot of anxiety. This was unusual. It had not happened, in my experience.
Everybody's imagining the worst.
Absolutely. Compounding this was the fact that we had a hostile Russian contact, a surface ship in the vicinity, very near us, and we were aware of that. So going to the surface or near the surface to deploy another type of antenna to listen to shortwave, which is, there are a lot of redundant systems to communicate with submarines. Shortwave, satellites, just like you mentioned, long wave. But we were precluded from doing that because of the high state of readiness and because of this surface contact.
Right.
So, as you can imagine.
Oh, well, if you presume the worst, which you have to, then obviously you're not going to go to the surface, particularly if you've got somebody dogging you on the surface. So that makes sense, right?
Exactly.
Right.
This is what I'm talking about right here. Okay. First off, let me correct it. It wasn't March 24th. It was April 15th, but it was still 1986. And I remember that day very well. So, all right. Why do you have to presume the worst? See, this is the Crimson Tide script, right? Right. Crimson Tide, they had weeks of news reports and flash messages and this buildup of what did they have in 1986 aboard the U.S. Grant that said, hey, the world, Libya attacked the discotheque in Germany the previous December, and Reagan was mad at the Libyans about it. And suddenly this takes you to the edge of World War III with no build-up, nothing. And we're out of communications for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. And again, I am a submarine expert, but I'm from the 1980s. Normally down deep, don't we just have a trailing wire to kick up an ELF signal that calls us to come up and get something more important? Right. I mean, we're not constantly copying the broadcast.
Whether he was an officer or not, he does set up the show enough. He sets up the show enough that he establishes he has some knowledge of submarine operations. So, he says enough to well, it's believable he was on board a submarine. But rather this incident happened, well, I mean, yeah, BS flags were going up everywhere. I skipped ahead a little bit, Dave, because we don't have a lot of time to do that. So let me see where we're at right now. Hold on.
A lot of tension, but I don't particularly remember a whole lot of Russian public statements about it at the time.
Exactly, and that is kind of my point in all this. A lot goes on that by necessity people are not aware of, probably shouldn't be aware of. And this was one of those situations. So when this officer, the senior officer, the navigation officer, became extremely frightened, he really assumed that the worst had happened.
Sure.
And you have to realize at this time, I'm a fairly junior officer, and I'm in a panic. Working with my senior enlisted guys, trying to figure out what is wrong, why we cannot receive radio signals. And that's my primary concern. But I am, becoming increasingly aware that this officer is panicky. The standard operating procedure in a situation like that is basically to go very, very deep and to wait, because there's nothing else you can do. You don't have authorization to release weapons. You cannot come up and launch raise a periscope or another kind of antenna or send a message. You can't do anything. So you go deep and you wait and hope that the signals come back. So we did that for a period of about 2 hours. And within this 2 hour period, the navigation officer became so agitated that he went down to the wardroom where the officers eat their meals and actually went aft in the ship back towards the engineering compartments and the weapons departments. And he began to kind of talk up his version of what was happening in the outside world, essentially that we were at war and that, life as we knew it had ceased to exist. And there became, in this period of a few hours, a kind of a growing movement on board the ship that perhaps the thing to do would be to retaliate, to actually launch weapons.
You could have done that with no other authorization from land.
No, not without being in total violation of every regulation in the book.
Could it have been done physically, though?
Yeah.
If everybody in the ship had decided they were going to want to do it?
And that's the problem. Unfortunately, everybody in the ship does not have to agree. About 3 or 4 key officers have to agree, and enough of the crew would have to be persuaded that it was the thing to do, because obviously 3 men can't launch missiles alone.
Right.
But yeah, it could happen.
All right, I'm gonna stop right there. So you got your whiteboard up.
Yeah, and I can't figure out how to get rid of it.
Yeah, now you got to drop it. Unshare your screen. I think it's at the bottom. He's at the thing, right?
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
Can't figure out how to get rid of it.
Well, we got to get that off of there, Dave.
I don't say anything bad. Not too bad, anyway. Yeah. All right. The story just gets more and more fantastical. I'll figure it out here in a second. But you find yourself thinking to yourself, what in the world is this guy? I don't have any idea how to get rid of this whiteboard. So, all right. His story is that the navigator was panicking. Why would the navigator be panicking? And why would anybody care?
Yeah, and the navigator was passed over for command, so he's older than the captain, and he's mad.
Oh, well, that makes sense-ish.
Yeah. So, and then you got to have the whole crew agreeing. So there is some truth, like Crimson Tide. It kind of shows like just the captain and the weapons officer alone can launch weapons, and that's not true. You do have to have a lot of the crew. They don't have to agree. So we're young back then, and obviously we're highly screened, and your ASVAB scores had to be such that you could handle the training and stuff like that to even get into that program. But you're highly intelligent and skilled for to launch nuclear weapons, but we didn't have a lot of input as to whether we were going to launch. We were just simply trained to make sure the system operated correctly, how to troubleshoot it if it didn't operate, and to make sure those things went down range when the order was given. We didn't get into the onboard politics, if you would, whether or not these things were going to go down range or not. If you receive the message to launch, well, that's just the way it was. I mean, it was going to go, and like we said that about Crimson Tides before. The first validated message that they're going down range. There's no calling them back. So. Right. And
Battle Stations missile for strategic launch, Second Edition 1SQ. This is the captain. The release of nuclear weapons has been directed.
Second Edition 1SQ. Yeah. Release of nuclear weapons has been authorized as the XO. Both of them would come on. And
supervisor weapons, Second Edition 1SQ. My line, weapons supervisor, Second Edition 1SQ. Weapons supervisor I. Click.
So I'm not going to say, because even the older systems might still be classified as day, but there were multiple keys and switches, and a lot of people and extensive procedures, had to be done to get these things lined up to launch. But then again, like I said, the crew didn't have anything to do with the political, like if there is any politics, whether they're going on. Even as the officer corps, we weren't trained to be politicians.
The navigator was The navigator was panicking, and it scared this little radio guy who was, a young officer. It scared him to death because the navigator then runs around the ship telling everybody that we're at war and everything's done.
We got to launch. We're at war. We've already been nuked. There's no comms.
I mean, look, I get that there's a good-natured and even real difference between the O-gangers and the enlisted aboard a submarine. I get it. And even to this day, I'm uncomfortable referring to officers who I served with by their first name. I won't do it. I still call them Mr. So-and-so, Captain, whatever, XO. That said, I'm going to say this point blank, and I say this with great conviction. No officer I ever served with would have done that. And even the one guy who was the worst officer, let's do quote unquote thing, the most incompetent officer, the man who once told us that we were roving the missile compartment the wrong direction, who actually knocked himself out with a periscope at one point, even that guy wouldn't have done that.
Right.
So I just, to me,
and this is kind of unfair, Dave, too, because, it is, like you said, you set it up great. It's all entertainment. So we're kind of spoiling it for those who've never served on submarines, because if you listen to it from the non-trained submarine, it's a great show to listen to.
And that's
it's
what
fantastical. And I mean, you're on the edge of your seat listening to it, and you just can't wait to listen right after the commercial break and go to the next part.
And you send it to your congressman, and you tell your congressman, hey, congressman, you need to listen to this. So he signs it to some junior staffer to listen to. The junior staffer, who knows nothing of this, comes back a couple hours later and goes, Congressman, you really need to listen to this. We've got a huge problem in the military. We've got a huge problem. And next thing you know, we got congressional investigations and hearings about a BS show put on by a guy that's an entertainer about an interview with a guy that's clearly, in my view, sorry, Officer X, if you're out there and you're listening to this and you want to convince me otherwise, my email address, DolphinDave@slipperyfish.com, my phone number, 209-565-3283. But I don't believe your story. And I don't believe
it would be great if there was congressional hearings, because here's the fact, because I had to cross references. I kind of remembered it myself. But in 1986, known fact, the Ulysses S. Grant was in the yards, an extensive refit period. I think they were getting record of all things too. So they were there for a while. So I would love to bring, who would be there, testifying to Congress, ComSo Lant or something.
Right.
And the admiral's up there going, well, Congressman Ulysses S. Grant was in the yards. Can you prove that the Grant was in the yards there, Admiral?
It'd be like those hearings they did a few months ago.
Yeah.
Admiral, are you oh, geez. Some of these congressional hearings, Guam might tip over if military people.
Yeah, this is. We'll just listen a little bit more, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the world today relative to this topic.
And basically, the situation grew more and more heated. The weapons officer essentially sided with the navigator and stated publicly that he believed the captain was wrong and that he was being too cautious, and that he should go to the surface and try to establish communications, that he should do more to try to resolve the situation. And
what were the rules regarding? You said you had a surface ship that was close to you or dogging you, or did they know you were there?
No.
All right. What were the captain's options regarding surfacing? He's got a Russian ship above him. We might be at war. He would have no way of knowing for sure at that moment.
Essentially, under the rules of engagement at the time, he had no options. His option was to go deep and wait, and that was the option he exercised. The problem became kind of this internal atmosphere in the submarine. There was no problem with the regulations. There was no problem with safeguards. All that was in place. All that was working. It was all fine. But, the internal politics, human nature, was the problem. And essentially it got to the point where the crew was so agitated that the captain felt the need to post literally an armed guard at the small arms locker, because the weapons officer has key to that locker, and so do a few other senior officers. And he was really concerned. He posted an armed guard at the small arms locker to make sure that no one gained access to these,
So, I mean, this is definitely. You did look up when Crimson Tide was made, right? When did it come out?
Crimson Tide was released May 12th, 1995.
So yeah, I mean, this is following the script. It's following the script. So
yeah, I'm sorry.
This is armed guard at the small arms locker.
Because the weapons officer might do that. Might try to rebel.
Right.
I mean, come on. I mean, I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but man, no.
Yeah, and whether Art Bell knew like this was pre-set up, like this was all set up prior to them doing the show or not. I mean, he does a great job. Like his cadence, like you said, they kind of slow the show, not getting to the point. It's kind of like a slow. Yeah. It's like the beat is real slow, and the way he talks it out and he drags it out, and then Officer X gets on there acting all nervous and tries to speed it up. And then Art Bell kind of slows it down. Well, what about this? And couldn't he surface the ship?
Right.
And
the climax of this whole thing, because I can't take it anymore, Eric. The climax of this whole thing is they're about to do the big reveal, and Officer X has to go because somebody has called him and said, "You better shut." Right. Which is again, it's perfect radio theater. So that leaves you in the position of being able to make up your own mind about, well, what happened next. I can write my own story in my head, and that's what people do. And I don't know who this clown is, right. and I use the term clown somewhat hesitantly because he might actually be an officer. But if you were an officer in my Navy, I'm glad you're not now. I'm glad you got out because
yeah. See, you're right. Well, he did, before they did, thank God they did it, reestablish communications, Dave,
Yes, thank God.
Close call. Yeah. I mean, I hate to be,
by the way, did you guys on the grant
spoiling yeah.
By the way, did you guys on the grant when you were in the yards not practice break trail exercises? Did you not know how to get away from a Russian surface ship?
No, we didn't. No. We didn't know how.
See, we did. I mean, we practiced that all the time, man.
Well, it's just, I mean, it's like I said, if you have no submarine experience, it's a great show. So, I mean, I think if you have submarine experience, I think you should listen to it because you'll laugh through the whole thing.
or you'll end up like me. You'll end up throwing things at the screen going,
yeah, it throws a... Well, it's kind of like, too, like Rush Limbaugh. There was a lot of people that listened to Rush Limbaugh that absolutely hated him, and they kept listening every day to hate him.
Because he was a master at that, yeah.
Because it's kind of the same thing with this. If you're a submariner, it's going to be driving you bonkers. But if you're not a submariner, you're going to be going, oh, my gosh, is it really like this? So anyways, like we're going to post a link to this since it is a Internet Archive Library of Congress thing. That's why we could play some of it. And you can listen to it for free. There's no cost. And matter of fact, a lot of his old shows from the 90s are there if you're an Art Bell fan like I am. So because I buy into a lot of this stuff. I get caught up in it. And I know it's fantastical, but it's like Dave said, it's theater of the mind, and it's good stuff to pass the time, Like Jack Bauer, 24. Great series in the early 90s. But but the fact there's not one independent guy running around shooting and stabbing and torturing people and saving the world by himself. But it's great to think that. And like you said, the show made for fantastic ratings. I mean, it absolutely killed for at least 5 seasons. I think it was on 7 seasons or more, but I mean, I didn't see every single season, but it's like I said, it's the theater.
It's all about the ratings. All it is.
Great stuff. But so to kind of parallel the show, so it comes into mind. So there's nuclear weapons release protocols for any Navy that's out there going. But the concern being, and there's a lot of navies out there that have ballistic missile submarine capability. Some less capable, North Korea than others. India certainly is getting pretty capable. Pakistan, I think, has got a boat fielded. So there's a lot of players out there. So what we don't need, though, is, with the internet that we have today and the way that politics and theater, if you will, can travel so quickly, through social media, it gets people all worked up, like over this Ukraine thing. We don't know what we've discussed this before. What you see in social media and what's really happening is two different things. But then, and then it translates to, well, what's the nuclear weapons release protocols for all these different navies? So there's a lot of people as compared to when we serve that have nuclear weapons capability. So it makes me nervous at night, because I know to some great responsibility that NATO countries and I will say Russia too, are pretty responsible about nuclear weapons procedures anyways. But as the same with, the Chinese, North Korea, definitely, these India and Pakistan, who knows? But what we don't need is everybody's independent, because it seems like you go on Twitter and Facebook, more Twitter, here's a lot of people's opinion. We got to launch nukes now. We just need to nuke Russia. My favorite is people saying, lefties, if you will, saying, we got to nuke these people, or we got to go and take them out. And they've never served a day in their life, and they certainly would never serve in the military. What they don't realize is if we did get into a war, guess who's going to serve in the war? These loudmouth guys, with their business degrees, they're going to get drawn into the war, and off you go. Have fun. I mean, you wanted it. You got it.
Well, that's assuming it lasts long enough to draft them.
Yeah, even get that far.
Look, coming from my perspective of things, there's a lot of talk right now about tactical nuclear weaponry, which is an interesting discussion.
Micro nukes.
And I have long said, and I believe, and it's one of those philosophical discussions that you can have. Throughout most of my life, the theory about nuclear war was it's mutual assured destruction. It's unwinnable. You cannot win a nuclear war. And I've said, for as long as I can remember, I've said that's a myth. It's nonsense. It's all in how you define win. And if you get leaders that think that they can achieve their aims, your life is meaningless to them. And you need to understand that. If they can achieve their aims by using a nuclear weapon, they're going to do it because they don't really care about you, and they have a higher degree of survivability than you do. So that creates a situation where we need to be more aware of what's going on. I live literally 3 miles from SwiftPack. So I just sort of assume that if we ever go to a nuclear war, that I'm toast. I play with NUKE MAP all the time. What size weapon do the Russians have? Air burst, ground burst? Either way.
We should post that link too.
Right.
Yeah, we certainly need to post that link as well.
But it's something
you
like
look up a base, so
Yeah.
everybody's got a base near them, and
Right.
you just need to keep that in mind. We go into a war, there's a chance you're going to get nuked.
I'm pretty pragmatic about the whole thing. I mean, in the big scheme of things, what's the difference between the giant asteroid and the Russian nuke? I mean, I'm still dead either way. That said, it doesn't mean that I shouldn't speak out and I shouldn't say things I've talked to my congressperson about it. Look, there are things that we could be doing proactively. There are rumors, again, these are rumors, that in the 1950s and 60s, the United States shared with the Soviet Union, as it was then, our 1-point safe system so that it would do exactly that. It would create a situation where there was better control. And the view of the Eisenhower administration and the Kennedy administration was that it's better for them to have this technology than to not have it. So whether it's true or not, I don't know. I haven't become president yet. But when I become president, after I look at the file on the K-129, that's the next file I'll look up. Did we give them this 1-point safe technology or not? Because
we're still working on your presidential campaign, right?
Yeah,
That's still on for 2024.
No,
wait a minute.
2028.
We haven't announced that yet.
Right, 2028. I'm running for governor of Wyoming, so I need at least 4 years in Wyoming because gubernatorial experience before I run for president. So
that's right.
I figure it seems to be old white guys are the choice. So by then I'll be in my 70s and we'll be good to go.
And I like it, but we should be more worried about holding, like you said, it's gotten to a point where politicians, no matter what country you live in, don't really care about you. You're expendable. So we should spend more time securing our own individual countries, if you will, working on our own governments, holding our politicians accountable, than getting in and then whooping everybody up online on social media and talking about nuclear war. Because nuclear war is an ELE, just like the movie, is an extinction level event, whether you like it or not. If you think it's not winnable,
no.
you know, the radiation clouds are going to kill the planet. Nothing's going to grow for a while.
See, the thing that's remarkable to me is since the 1980s, when I was in the Navy, the left, the political left, has always been anti-war, 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 anti-war. War is unhealthy for children and other living things. Remember those T-shirts?
Yeah.
But now, for God's sakes, the Speaker of the American House of Representatives is standing up in front of television telling me that God wants me to pay for bombs for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Another spending bill getting rammed down.
And I'm realizing that we're coming to the point where rationality is rapidly leaving, and war is a very irrational act. Nuclear war, doubly so. And the more irrational people we have, particularly in our leadership, the more of a possibility it becomes. So we need to rein in these irrational lunatics. Nothing would please me greater than to go to bed tonight, get up tomorrow morning, and the political left, the Democrat Party in the United States, be anti-war again. Please go back to being the anti-war lunatics that you were from the 60s to now.
That would be great, wouldn't it?
I would be a lot happier. I would feel a lot better, and I would be a lot more certain of where we're going to be tomorrow, because you know what? I've been a political conservative my entire life. I've had my finger on the button. I've slept between nuclear weapons, and I'm telling you, I don't have any rampant desire to use them. And I don't know anybody that does.
Yeah, and I agree. Once we've been trained on the weapon system and knowing that it works, being stationed at NO2 and Cape Canaveral, testing, I didn't do all those launches, but, I worked on over at least 30 rockets because they slowed down the cadence. But, the system works, and it's worked very well since its inception with Polaris. So the whole idea and the reason we did those tests is, hey, it works, so let's just not do this. And Russia does the same. Hey, our system works too, so let's not do this. The point is the reason we even field them, and we don't field as many. And there's 41 for Freedom on top of the Ohio class submarines. There was a lot of firepower out there. Mm-hmm. We don't have as much out there now because it's it's not needed. We had literally thousands of warheads each, to the tune to 4,000 to 6,000 between the two countries. How many warheads do you need to make it winnable? And it's not winnable. So you don't even just a few strikes. Just makes the environment trash. So it's just hold your governments, your local politicians, start even your local community, be more of let's fix our countries and more about that than then get involved in other people's wars over in Ukraine and stuff like that. Or, let's get back securing our borders too. That's another thing. Let's just, start at your local level, worry about securing, and then work your way up, talk to your congressman. Let's stay off of the talking about the button for.
You remember back in the 80s? Back in the 80s, this was a pretty common thing in England. The local city councils would declare their boroughs, their little cities in England as non-nuclear war zones. So Watford Gap would be a non-nuclear. We don't believe in war in Watford Gap. So the Russians, if they invaded, were supposed to stop Watford Gap and not invade because we
Hey, we don't believe in war, so you can't come in. Like, there's signs posted in the Russian.
Right. No war.
Oh, they have a sign. Yeah, we can't go in.
But you know what? Again, I'd be a lot happier.
War is a messy business.
I'd be a lot happier if we went back.
I said war is a messy business, ladies and gentlemen. Very messy business.
Well, I got a lot of stuff to get on to today. So you want to get a hold of me, FTB1 Follow him. It's DolphinDave at slipperyfish.com.
And I'm Eric at theSubvet.com. You can go to my Facebook group, Facebook.com/group/TheSubvet, and on Twitter. I'm starting to post news. I'm going to try to see if I can do that. Also on the Twitter feed as well, the Subvet feed. So you can go to this, and you can go to my website, thesubvet.com, and hopefully we're going to start spinning up more content for you guys. So look out for that, and help support the page. And I do have a donation link to PayPal if you go to the subvet.com/donate. And I don't know if Dave's got one or not. Well, but we'll post those links as well. So we're going to post that NUKE map, the link to this podcast, and links to our show pages and everything too. And this should be a great podcast for you guys to listen to. And we'll look forward to talking to you the next time.
Because
the Subvets. We're gonna get that. We got to time it out. We gotta go. Well, let's do it. It's practice right here, Dave. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Subvets.
Subvets.
Jeez, I give up. We'll see you next time.